He wasn't just a millionaire. He was a king, and his kingdom was a glittering empire of glass and steel, built on his own genius. Malric Thorne, CEO of Aurasphere, had it all: the sprawling Manhattan penthouse, the respect of Wall Street, and a beautiful wife, Soraya, who was the perfect ornament to his perfect life. He thought she was content in her gilded cage, occupied with charities and galas, oblivious to his indiscretions. He believed she knew nothing of the late-night meetings, the secret credit cards, or the ambitious young protégé he was grooming. He was wrong. He drastically underestimated the woman who shared his bed, and in the world of high finance, there is no currency more valuable than knowledge. This is the story of how a woman pushed to the edge didn't just get even. She took everything. The air in the penthouse atop the Olympia Tower was always a perfect climate-controlled 72 degrees. It was an atmosphere as meticulously managed as the life of the man who owned it, Malric Thorne. From this perch, 80 stories above Central Park, Malric could survey his kingdom. The city lights glittered below a sprawling constellation of lesser stars, all orbiting his magnificent sun. At 45, Malric possessed the kind of ruthless charm that Wall Street both feared and revered. His company Aurasphere, a revolutionary AI-driven branding firm, had reshaped modern advertising. It was his vision, his creation, and his alone. His wife, Soraya Vance Thorne, was in his eyes the most exquisite of his acquisitions. With a serene beauty that defied her 42 years and a lineage that traced back to the Mayflower, she was the embodiment of old money grace. She ran their homes, the penthouse, the Hamptons estate, the chalet in Aspen, with an effortless efficiency that Malric took for granted. He saw her life as a series of pleasant, inconsequential tasks, approving menus for dinner parties, chairing committees for art galas, and raising their 2 children, Leo 17 and Chloe 15. He loved her, or at least he loved the idea of her. She was the perfect partner for the Malric Thorne brand. This evening was typical. Malric strode into the apartment, the scent of the city clinging to his Tom Ford suit. He loosened his tie, a slash of navy silk, and dropped his briefcase by the door. Soraya, his voice boomed, expecting her to appear as she always did. She emerged from the hallway that led to the children's rooms, a soft smile on her lips. She was dressed in a simple cream-colored cashmere dress, her honey-blonde hair pulled back in a loose chignon. "Hello, darling. Tough day." "The usual battles," he said, accepting the crystal tumbler of Macallan 25 she offered. He kissed her cheek, a perfunctory gesture. "The board is getting jittery about the Q3 projections. I had to remind them who built this company from a garage in Queens into a global powerhouse." He took a long swallow of the scotch, the warmth spreading through his chest. "They're sheep, all of them." "Well, you're their shepherd," she said, smoothly, her voice a low, calming melody. "I'm sure you guided them masterfully." He grunted in response, his eyes already on his phone, scrolling through emails. He was only half listening. This was their nightly ritual, his grand pronouncements, her soothing affirmations. It was a script they had perfected over 2 decades of marriage. But tonight, a discordant note had already been played hours before he'd arrived home. Earlier that afternoon, Soraya had been reviewing the household's monthly statements. It was a task she performed with the same meticulous attention she gave to everything else. She wasn't just checking for fraud. She was a connoisseur of their financial life, an expert in the intricate dance of their wealth. She clicked open the statement for the Onyx Centurion card, the one Malric used for his personal expenses. The charges were a familiar litany of luxury lunches at the Grill, a new Patek Philippe watch, flights to London. And then she saw it. A charge for $15,000 from a jeweler she didn't recognize Serafina's atelier. It was a boutique, highly exclusive, known for its modern bespoke pieces. It wasn't Malric's style. He preferred the established gravitas of Tiffany or Cartier for the gifts he bought her. This was different, more intimate, more personal. The charge was dated 3 weeks ago, the day of their anniversary. The Patek Philippe was his anniversary gift to himself. The gift he had given her was a handsome but standard check for her preferred charity. Her heart, for the first time in a long time, beat a sharp, painful rhythm against her ribs. It wasn't the money. The money was meaningless, a drop in an endless ocean. It was the name, Serafina. It sounded young, ethereal. It sounded like everything she wasn't. She closed the laptop, her hands perfectly steady. She walked to the vast window and looked down at the city. From up here, the people were ants, their lives a chaotic, indecipherable scurry. For years, she had felt a similar detachment floating above the messy realities of life in her bubble of privilege. But now, a crack had appeared in the glass. Later that evening, as Malric continued to tap at his phone, Soraya watched him. She studied the familiar lines of his face, the strong jaw, the confident set of his mouth, the faint lines around his eyes that crinkled when he was truly amused, a sight she hadn't seen directed at her in years. "Anything exciting happening at the office?" she asked, her tone light, conversational. Malric looked up, a flicker of something annoyance in his eyes, before it was replaced by practiced indifference. "Big things on the horizon. We're about to land the LVMH digital account. It's a game changer." He paused, then added, "Katerina has been instrumental. A real killer instinct, that one. Reminds me of me 20 years ago. Katerina Petrova." The name was familiar. She was Malric's protégée, a sharp, raven-haired VP in her late 20s, who had risen through the ranks at Aurasphere with astonishing speed. Malric spoke of her, often praising her ambition, her relentless drive. Soraya had met her a few times at company events. She remembered a firm handshake, eyes that were a startling shade of cobalt blue, and a smile that didn't quite reach them. "That's wonderful, dear Soraya," said her own smile, a perfect, placid mask. "You must be very proud of her." "Proud isn't the word. She's an asset. A weapon." He corrected his focus, returning to his phone. "She's secured a preliminary meeting in Paris next month. We'll need to fly out charm Bernard Arnault himself." Paris, the city where they had honeymooned. The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture she didn't want to see, but could no longer ignore. The late nights, he claimed, were spent at the office, the faint, unfamiliar scent of perfume on his shirts, the new, almost manic energy he had lately. And now, a $15,000 piece of bespoke jewelry from an atelier called Serafina's, and a business trip to Paris with his brilliant, beautiful weapon. The pain was sharp, a physical blow. But beneath it, something else stirred. A cold, quiet rage. An emotion she had suppressed for so long she had almost forgotten its existence. Malric had made his fatal error. It wasn't the cheating. It was the assumption that she was a fool. He looked at her and saw a decorative object, a beautifully maintained piece of property. He had forgotten who she was before she became Mrs. Thorne. He had forgotten about Soraya Vance. Soraya Vance, who had graduated top of her class at Columbia Law. Soraya Vance, who had passed the New York bar exam with one of the highest scores in the state. Soraya Vance, who had put a ferociously promising career in corporate litigation on hold to raise his children and build his world because he had asked her to, had promised her it would be their shared kingdom. He had forgotten that she knew exactly how kingdoms were built, and she knew exactly how they were brought to ruin. That night, for the first time in years, Soraya did not go to bed with her husband. She waited until the sound of his light snoring echoed from the master bedroom. Then she slipped into his home office, a sanctuary of leather and mahogany he believed was his alone. She sat in his oversized chair, the leather cool against her skin, and turned on his computer. His password, she knew, was the name of the first boat he ever owned, Invictus. The irony was not lost on her, unconquered. She navigated silently through his files, her fingers flying across the keyboard with a muscle memory she thought was long gone. She wasn't looking for love letters or explicit photos. Amateurs looked for proof of an affair. Soraya was looking for proof of a crime. She opened the corporate expense ledgers, the offshore account statements, the intercompany fund transfers. She was no longer a wife. She was a forensic investigator, and her husband's life was the crime scene. It didn't take long. Malric was arrogant, and arrogance bred carelessness. He had become so comfortable in his deceit that he had stopped covering his tracks with any real diligence. She found a recurring payment, a consulting fee of $50,000 a month, being funneled from Aurasphere's marketing budget to a shell corporation, Petrova Global Strategies LLC. The registered agent was Katerina Petrova. The company was less than 6 months old. It had no other clients, no website, no physical address beyond a P.O. box in Delaware. It was a ghost, a phantom entity created for the sole purpose of siphoning money from Aurasphere. He wasn't just sleeping with his protégé. He was embezzling company funds to bankroll her. The rage she felt was now a pure crystalline thing. It was no longer hot. It was ice cold. He was using the company she had sacrificed her own ambitions for to build a new life for another woman. He was stealing from their children's legacy. She copied the files onto a small encrypted flash drive. Then she wiped the computer's recent activity log with a few keystrokes. She slipped out of the office, as silent as a wraith, and returned to the guest room she had prepared for herself. She lay in the dark, the flash drive clutched in her hand. It felt heavy, a small, dense weight of betrayal and opportunity. The pain was still there, a dull ache in her chest. But the path forward was starting to become clear. Malric thought he was the king, the shepherd, the master of his universe. He had no idea that a quiet rebellion was already underway. He had no idea that the woman he dismissed as a sheep was in fact a wolf, and she was about to take back the kingdom. The days that followed were a masterclass in deception, but the performance was Soraya's, not Malric's. On the surface, nothing changed. She was the picture of serene domesticity. She hosted a flawless luncheon for the board members' wives, discussing summer plans in the Hamptons and the merits of various auction houses. She helped Chloe with her history project on the fall of the Roman Empire, drawing parallels between imperial hubris and modern-day titans with a wry subtlety that was lost on her daughter, but not on herself. She played tennis with her friends at the club, her backhand as strong and reliable as ever. To Malric, she was the same predictable, placid Soraya. He remained blissfully unaware, wrapped in the cocoon of his own self-importance. He would breeze in late from the office, smelling of the city and Cat's Chanel No. 5, and offer a cursory explanation. "Sorry, darling. Closing the LVMH deal is a beast. Cat and I were buried in strategy decks. As long as you're slaying dragons, my dear Soraya," would reply, her smile never faltering. "Don't forget the gala for the Met on Friday. You promised you'd be on your best behavior." Inside, however, Soraya was a whirlwind of cold, calculated activity. The guest room had become her war room. Each night after the house fell silent, she would lock the door and get to work. The flash drive was her Rosetta Stone, and with every file she decrypted, a clearer picture of Malric's treachery emerged. The Shell Corporation was just the beginning. He had been sloppy. The $50,000 a month was the baseline, but there were other more egregious expenditures. He had used the Aurasphere corporate jet for a client meeting in St. Bart's that coincided perfectly with Katerina's birthday, documented on her Instagram, with a photo of her on a yacht captioned, "Best birthday, surprise ever." Feeling so blessed, he had expensed a down payment on a luxury condo in Soho, classifying it as a corporate retainer property. But the deed Soraya found through public records was in Katerina's name. He wasn't just funding her lifestyle. He was building her an empire in miniature, a shadow kingdom funded by his own. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. It was a betrayal not just of her, but of his employees, his shareholders, and the legacy his own father had helped him build. Aurasphere hadn't started in a garage in Queens. That was a piece of corporate mythology Malric had spun for journalists. It had been started by his father, Robert Thorne, a decent, hard-working man who had built a respectable marketing firm. Malric, with his tech-savvy and aggressive vision, had transformed it, rocketing it into the stratosphere. But he had forgotten the foundation of integrity his father had laid. Soraya knew she needed more than evidence of embezzlement. To truly remove him to protect the company from the fallout of a messy public scandal, she needed leverage. Overwhelming, undeniable, and absolute. That's when she called Marcus Ryland. Marcus had been her best friend at Columbia Law. A sharp, scrupulous man who had resisted the siren song of corporate law to become a partner at a small but formidable firm specializing in shareholder litigation. They had stayed in touch over the years, a bond of intellectual respect and genuine affection remaining between them. She met him not at his office, but at a quiet, dusty bookshop in the West Village that they both loved. Amidst the comforting scent of old paper and ink, she laid out her story. She spoke in a low, even tone, presenting the facts without emotion, as if she were briefing him on a case. She handed him a copy of the flash drive. Marcus listened, his expression growing more grim with every detail. He had never liked Malric, had always seen the brittle ego beneath the charisma. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, looking at the woman before him. The years of playing the perfect society wife had softened her features, but now he could see the brilliant, tenacious lawyer he once knew re-emerging like a photograph developing in a dark room. "Soraya," he said, his voice laced with concern. "This is explosive. Embezzlement, corporate fraud. This goes far beyond a divorce settlement. If this gets out, it could destroy Aurasphere. The stock will plummet. The SEC will launch an investigation. Malric will likely face prison time." "I'm aware of that," Soraya replied, her gaze unwavering. "I have no desire to see the company my children stand to inherit be destroyed by his recklessness, and I have no wish to see their father in prison. That would be a victory for no one." Marcus leaned forward. "Then what is the endgame here? What do you want?" "I don't want a settlement," she said, the words as hard as diamonds. "I don't want his money. I want the company." Marcus stared at her. "You want to oust him? A sitting CEO and founder. Soraya, the board is loyal to him. They'll circle the wagons to protect him and the company from a scandal. They'll paint you as a bitter, vengeful wife. That's why a public scandal is my last resort, not my opening salvo," she explained. "I need a weapon they can't ignore, something internal, something that makes removing him the only logical choice for the survival of the company." She paused, then asked the question that had been forming in her mind for days. "Marcus. When we got married, Malric was just taking over the company from his father. Robert was worried about Malric's ego, his spending habits. He insisted we sign a complex prenuptial agreement. Malric also set up a series of trusts for tax purposes. I signed dozens of documents. I was a lawyer, but I was also in love. I didn't scrutinize them as I should have." Her voice was calm, but Marcus could hear the undertone. "What are you thinking? I want you to pull every document related to my marriage and my holdings in Aura Sphere. Every trust agreement, every clause in the prenup, every share allocation document from the last 20 years. Malric thinks I own nothing. That everything is in his name or in trusts he controls. I want to know if he's right." For the next week, Marcus's team dug. They pulled records from law firms, accountancy offices, and state archives, and then he called her. His voice was electric. "Soraya, you need to come to my office, now." The conference room was stark and modern, a stark contrast to the cozy bookshop. Marcus laid a thick bound document on the polished table between them. It was the original Thorne Family Legacy Trust, established by Robert Thorne 2 years before his death. Robert was a shrewder man than Malric ever gave him credit for. Marcus began his finger tracing a line of dense legal text. He was worried about Malric's recklessness and potential for a messy divorce down the line. He wanted to protect the company and his grandchildren, so he structured the trust in a very peculiar way. He explained. Malric was the primary beneficiary and the managing trustee, giving him day-to-day control. He held a 40% stake of Aura Sphere's voting shares in his own name. However, Robert had placed another 35% of the company's shares into this irrevocable trust. The terms stated that upon Malric's death, or in the event of proven gross financial malfeasance or moral turpitude that threatens the stability of the company, control of the trust's shares would automatically transfer to a co-trustee. And who, Soraya asked, her breath catching in her throat, is the co-trustee Marcus turned the page and slid it across the table. There on a dusty signature line from nearly 15 years ago was her name, Soraya Vance Thorne. She stared at the signature, a younger, more hopeful version of her own handwriting. She remembered signing it vaguely. Malric had passed it off as a minor tax formality, a piece of estate planning. He had probably counted on her never looking at it again, or perhaps he himself had forgotten the exact clause, blinded by his own arrogance. His father had put a loaded gun in her hand, and Malric had just supplied the ammunition. With this, Marcus said, his voice low with awe, "You don't just have a complaint. You have a nuke. If you can prove the financial malfeasance to the other board members, you can invoke this clause. Their fiduciary duty would be to the company, not to Malric. You would control 35% of the shares. Combined with a few allied board members, you would have a voting majority." Soraya leaned back in her chair, the leather creaking softly. The path was now brilliantly, terrifyingly clear. She wouldn't need to go to the press. She wouldn't need to file for divorce. This would be a battle fought not in a courtroom, but in the one place Malric felt most invincible, the boardroom. There are 5 other members on the board besides Malric, she said, her mind already working. 2 are his cronies, Barry Lang and Michael Chen. They'll stand by him no matter what. That leaves 3. Who are they? Marcus asked, grabbing a legal pad. Dr. Evelyn Reed, a tech futurist from Stanford. She's pragmatic, unsentimental. She cares about one thing: shareholder value and stability. Then there's General Mark O'Brien, retired 4-star. He's the ethics and governance chair, a man of unimpeachable integrity. He despises scandal. Soraya paused, thinking of the final, crucial piece. And then there's Alistair Finch. Alistair was the oldest member of the board, in his late 70s. He had been Robert Thorne's best friend and right-hand man. He had stayed on as a favor to Robert to provide a steadying hand for his brilliant but volatile son. Alistair loved Malric, but he had revered Robert. Alistair is the key. Soraya said, a plan solidifying in her mind. Evelyn Reed will follow the logic. General O'Brien will follow the ethics. But Alistair Finch, Alistair will follow his loyalty to my father-in-law. I need to convince him that I am honoring Robert's legacy and Malric is the one destroying it. How will you do that? A slow, determined smile touched Soraya's lips for the first time in weeks. By arranging a little chat, it's time I stopped playing the part of the perfect wife and started reminding people what a Vance from Columbia Law is capable of. The first move in a war is never a frontal assault. It is a quiet repositioning of pieces, a subtle shift in the balance of power that goes unnoticed by the enemy. Soraya Thorne. With the Thorne Family Legacy Trust document as her guide, began her campaign not with a declaration of war, but with a cup of tea. Her target was Alistair Finch. At 78, Alistair was the grand old man of Aurasphere's board, a living link to the company's more modest, honorable past. He lived in a stately pre-war building on Park Avenue, a world away from Malric's sterile, modern penthouse. Soraya knew that a direct, aggressive approach would backfire. Alistair's loyalty to the Thorne name was deep, and he viewed Malric as a surrogate son. She couldn't attack Malric. She had to present herself as the savior of Robert Thorne's true vision. She called him on his private line, her voice warm and tinged with a carefully calibrated note of concern. Alistair, it's Soraya Thorne. I do hope I'm not disturbing you. I was hoping I might be able to steal a moment of your time. I have some concerns about the company's direction, and I so value the perspective you always brought to Robert. The use of her father-in-law's name was deliberate, a key inserted into a lock she hoped would turn. It did. Alistair, flattered and intrigued, invited her for tea the following afternoon. She arrived at his apartment dressed not in her usual couture, but in a simple, elegant navy blue dress. It was a costume of quiet competence, of serious purpose. Alistair greeted her warmly, his kind, wrinkled eyes filled with affection. "Soraya, my dear, you look wonderful." Worried about the company. "Don't tell me Malric's ambition is finally giving you grey hairs." "Something like that," she said, with a soft smile, accepting a cup of Earl Grey. They sat in his library surrounded by leather-bound books and photos of a younger Alistair with Robert Thorne, the two of them beaming on a sailboat. For 20 minutes, Soraya let Alistair talk. She listened patiently as he reminisced about the old days, about Robert's integrity, about their shared dream of building a company that was not just profitable, but respectable. Then at the right moment, she gently guided the conversation. Robert was always so concerned with legacy. Wasn't he? She began. He believed a company's reputation was its most valuable asset, more than its stock price or its market share. Absolutely, Alistair agreed, nodding emphatically. He used to say, "You can earn back money, but you can't earn back trust." Malric is brilliant, a genius even, but sometimes I worry he forgets that. This was her opening. "That's why I'm here, Alistair," she said, her voice dropping to a confidential tone. "I'm worried that Malric is exposing the company to a level of risk that Robert never would have countenanced, a risk that could tarnish his entire legacy." She didn't present the evidence of the affair. That would seem petty personal. Instead, she framed it as a matter of corporate governance and financial recklessness. She spoke of a shell corporation, of significant funds being diverted without board oversight, of a key employee being given preferential financial treatment that amounted to embezzlement. She used phrases like fiduciary irresponsibility and potential for catastrophic reputational damage. She didn't mention Katerina Petrova by name. She simply referred to a senior executive. Alistair's expression shifted from paternal warmth to sharp concern. "Soraya, these are extremely serious allegations." "Do you have proof I do?" she said calmly. She slid a single discreet file folder across the antique coffee table. It contained printouts of the Shell Corporation's registration and a summary of the unexplained payments, stripped of any salacious details. It was a clean, clinical presentation of financial fraud. As Alistair read, his face grew pale. He recognized the danger immediately. This wasn't a marital squabble. This was a corporate time bomb. "And there's one more thing," Soraya said softly. She produced a copy of the Thorne Family Legacy Trust Agreement with the specific clause highlighted. Robert saw this possibility. He foresaw a day when Malric's ambition might get the better of his judgment. He put a fail-safe in place to protect the company, to protect his legacy. She pointed to the co-trustee's signature line. "He put his trust in me, Alistair." The old man stared at the document, his mind clearly reeling. He looked from the papers to the composed, determined woman sitting before him. He was seeing her for the first time not as Malric's beautiful wife, but as Robert Thorne's chosen guardian. The loyalty in his heart was being pulled in two different directions. But Soraya had framed the choice perfectly. He could be loyal to the son, or he could be loyal to the father's final wish. "What do you intend to do?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "I intend to call an emergency board meeting," Soraya said. "I will present my evidence and invoke the clause in the trust. I will assume control of the 35% stake, and I will ask the board to vote to remove Malric as CEO and install an interim leader to stabilize the company and conduct a full internal audit." "And who would you propose as this interim leader?" Alistair asked, his eyes searching hers. "Me," she said, without a trace of hesitation. The audacity of it hung in the air. But she followed it immediately with logic. "I am the only one who can do it without triggering a public scandal. It can be framed as a family matter, a temporary shift in leadership for personal reasons. I have the legal standing through the trust. I have a law degree from Columbia. And most importantly, my sole priority would be to clean this up and protect the company that bears my children's name. I am not an outsider. I am a thorn." Alistair leaned back, the weight of the decision settling on his frail shoulders. He saw the abyss Malric was leading them toward, and he saw the lifeline Soraya was offering. It was a coup, yes, but it was a coup designed to save the kingdom, not burn it down. "Robert always did say you were the smartest of the bunch," he murmured, more to himself than to her. He looked at her, a new respect dawning in his eyes. "You'll have my support, Soraya. For Robert, 1 down, 2 to go." Her meeting with Dr. Evelyn Reed was entirely different. It took place in a sterile conference room at a neutral law office. There was no tea, no pleasantries. Evelyn, a sharp woman in her 50s with a geometric haircut and an intense analytical gaze, got straight to the point. "Mrs. Thorne, I have 15 minutes between calls. I was told this was a matter of urgent corporate governance." Soraya, adapting her strategy, presented an even more streamlined version of the facts. She handed Evelyn an iPad already queued to a presentation detailing the flow of funds from Aurasphere to Petrova Global Strategies. She highlighted the lack of deliverables, the clear pattern of embezzlement, and the potential SEC violations. She concluded with the bottom-line risk analysis. "The exposure here is incalculable," Soraya stated. "If this becomes public, we're looking at a 50–60% drop in stock value overnight. We'll lose the LVMH contract before it's even signed. We'll be buried in shareholder lawsuits and federal investigations. The company as we know it will cease to exist." Evelyn scrolled through the data, her face impassive. She was a creature of numbers and logic, and the numbers were undeniable. "And your solution?" Evelyn asked, not looking up from the iPad. "A clean internal transfer of power. I invoke a controlling interest via a family trust, a fact my legal counsel has confirmed. I take over as interim CEO. Malric Thorne steps down for health and personal reasons. We hire an outside firm to conduct a forensic audit under my supervision, and we quietly claw back every cent that was misappropriated. We terminate the executive involved. No scandal, no press. The stock dips by maybe 5% on the leadership change, and then it recovers when we show stability and continuity. It is the only move that guarantees shareholder value is protected." Evelyn finally looked up, her sharp eyes boring into Soraya's. She wasn't assessing Soraya's pain or her motives. She was assessing her competence. "You believe you are qualified to run a multi-billion-dollar tech firm?" "I believe I am qualified to manage a crisis," Soraya corrected her. "My first act will be to empower the existing capable leadership, the COO, the CTO, who have been marginalized by Malric's increasingly erratic behavior. My job is not to design AI algorithms. My job is to restore integrity and stability. And yes, in that I am eminently qualified." Evelyn was silent for a full minute. She tapped the iPad, then switched it off. "Your logic is sound," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "The current path presents an unacceptable level of risk. Your proposed solution mitigates that risk effectively. You will have my vote, Mrs. Thorne. Not for your sake or for Malric's, but for the sake of the company's balance sheet. 2 down." The final piece was General O'Brien. Soraya knew he was the ethics chair for a reason. He was a man who lived by a rigid code of honor. She requested a video call with him, knowing he was at his ranch in Montana. On the screen, his face was weathered, his posture ramrod straight, even when seated. She didn't try to appeal to legacy or to finance. She appealed to his code. "General," she began respectfully, "I am coming to you as the chair of the Ethics and Governance Committee because I have uncovered a profound breach of ethics at the highest level of Aurasphere." She laid out the case this time, emphasizing the moral failure. She spoke of the trust placed in a CEO, the duty to his employees and shareholders. She described the deceit, the creation of a fraudulent entity to enrich an employee with whom she finally admitted Malric was having an affair. She painted a picture of a leader whose personal corruption had now become a corporate disease. This is not just about money, General, she said, her voice filled with conviction. It is about a rot at the core of the company. It is about a leader who has abandoned his own code of conduct. If the board knows of this and does nothing, then we are all complicit. We are violating the very principles your committee exists to uphold. General O'Brien's face was like granite. He had seen corruption in war-torn countries and in the halls of power. He recognized it instantly. What you're describing, Mrs. Thorne, is a catastrophic failure of leadership. It is dishonorable. It is, she agreed. The trust agreement his father created gives me the authority to force a change. But I need the board to sanction it, to make it an orderly transition, not a chaotic mess. I need your vote to uphold the honor of this company. The general did not need to deliberate. For him, it was a simple matter of right and wrong. A leader who has lost his honor cannot lead. He said, his voice like gravel. You do what you must, Mrs. Thorne. You will have my vote. The alliance was forged. 3 key votes secured, joining her own impending 35% stake. She now controlled the board. The trap was set. All that was left was to summon the king into the throne room and announce that he had been deposed. Soraya instructed Marcus to have the corporate council officially call an emergency board meeting for the next day at 10:00 a.m. The reason cited was vague and ominous. To discuss a critical governance matter and a leadership challenge that has arisen. That night when Malric came home, he was in a foul mood. Can you believe this? He fumed, throwing his briefcase onto a chair. Some ridiculous emergency board meeting called for tomorrow morning. No agenda, just some cryptic nonsense. It's probably Alistair getting his knickers in a twist about our risk profile again. I'll have to waste my morning placating that old fossil. Soraya simply poured him his scotch. I'm sure you'll handle it, darling, she said, her voice a perfect, soothing balm. Her eyes, however, held a glint of cold, hard steel. He had no idea he was talking to the very person who had called the meeting. He had no idea he was drinking a toast to his own downfall. Tomorrow, his reign would end. The Hiko Aura Sphere boardroom was Malric Thorne's cathedral, a top-floor symphony of polished obsidian and panoramic views. He strode in at 9:58 a.m., exuding an aura of annoyed but absolute control. He nodded curtly to the assembled members, a somber Alistair Finch, an unreadable Dr. Evelyn Reed, and a stern General O'Brien on the video screen. His loyalists Barry Lang and Michael Chen offered sycophantic smiles. All right, David, let's get this over with, Malric said, taking his seat at the head of the table. What's this critical governance matter? The company's general counsel. David Chen cleared his throat. Malric, the meeting was called at the request of a majority stakeholder to address a leadership challenge. Malric laughed, a short, barking sound. A leadership challenge? I own 40% of this company. Who exactly is this majority stakeholder? As if on cue, the boardroom doors opened. Every head turned. Malric's smile froze, replaced by a look of utter bewilderment. Soraya Thorne walked in. She was dressed for battle in a charcoal grey power suit, her expression radiating a quiet authority that silenced the room. Beside her was Marcus Ryland, carrying a briefcase. Soraya, what in God's name are you doing here? Malric demanded, his voice a mixture of anger and confusion. This is a closed board meeting. I'm aware. Soraya said, her voice cool and steady as she took a seat opposite him. She didn't look at her husband. She addressed the board. Good morning. I am here today in my capacity as co-trustee of the Thorne Family Legacy Trust. Malric's face flushed. The Legacy Trust. That's a family matter, Soraya. It has no bearing here. Leave before you embarrass yourself. On the contrary, Soraya replied, her gaze finally locking with his. The cold fire in her eyes made him flinch. The trust is precisely why we are here. It holds a 35% stake in Aura Sphere's voting shares, and it contains Clause 7b, which stipulates that in the event of proven gross financial malfeasance by the managing trustee, control of the shares transfers immediately to the co-trustee. As of this morning, I am invoking that clause. A wave of shock rippled through the room. Malric's confusion curdled into rage. Proven malfeasance. That's a slanderous accusation. You have no proof. This is a pathetic attempt to get a bigger divorce settlement, isn't it? This has nothing to do with divorce, Malric Soraya said, her tone cutting. This is about your crimes against this company. Marcus Ryland spoke for the first time, his voice calm and authoritative as he distributed thin folders. We have prepared a full dossier for each of you. You will find complete documentation of a shell corporation, Petrova Global Strategies LLC, created by Mr. Thorne, to funnel company funds to a subordinate Ms. Katerina Petrova. At the mention of Kat's name, the color drained from Malric's face. The dossier includes, Marcus continued as a damning flowchart appeared on the main screen. Proof of over $2 million in embezzled funds. This includes a monthly consulting fee, as well as payments for real estate and luxury travel, all falsified as business expenses. This is taken out of context, Malric sputtered, scrambling. Kat Petrova is a key strategic partner. These were retainer fees. Dr. Evelyn Reed spoke, her voice sharp and clinical. Mr. Thorne, the board never approved this partnership. I find it curious that this partner has no other clients and no tangible deliverables associated with $2 million in payments. Malric's eyes darted around the room, looking for an ally. He found none. Soraya let the evidence hang in the air before delivering the next blow. This isn't just about the money, it's about the risk. The LVMH deal, I spoke with their general counsel yesterday. I explained that Aura Sphere was addressing a serious internal governance issue. They have officially put all negotiations on hold, pending the outcome of this meeting. That was the kill shot. The news that his magnum opus was in jeopardy, and that Soraya was the cause, left him speechless. You did what he whispered. I acted to protect the company. Soraya stated, her voice ringing with authority. Something you, as CEO, should have done. She turned back to the board. The situation is clear. Our CEO has committed fraud. His actions constitute gross financial malfeasance. Therefore, I am formally assuming control of the trust's 35% of voting shares. Combined with my personal shares, I now control 37% of this company. She looked directly at her husband, whose face was a mask of disbelief, hatred, and raw fear. I now call for a vote of no confidence in CEO Malric Thorne, Soraya announced, and a subsequent vote to immediately terminate his employment for cause. This is insane, Barry Lang stammered, but his voice was drowned out by Soraya's focus. The vote, please, she commanded. All those in favor of no confidence. Soraya raised her hand. Slowly, Alistair Finch raised his. Dr. Evelyn Reed's hand went up instantly. On the screen, General O'Brien raised his. A clear majority. The motion carries. Soraya said, her voice a statement of fact. Now the vote for termination for cause. The same 4 hands went up. The motion carries, she stated again. Malric Thorne is hereby removed as CEO effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. It was over. Malric sat stunned, the arrogance stripped away, leaving only a hollowed-out shell. He rose slowly, his chair scraping loudly in the silent room. He looked at Alistair with eyes full of betrayal, then at his wife. "You," he hissed the word filled with venom. "You did this." No Malric, Soraya replied, her expression unyielding. "You did this to yourself." I just turned on the lights. 2 uniformed security guards entered the room. The humiliation was absolute. Without another word, Malric allowed them to lead him out of his cathedral. The boardroom doors clicked shut behind him, sealing his fate. In the silence, Soraya Thorne remained standing. She had won the war. Now she had to rule the kingdom. The fall of a king, however, just is never a quiet affair. While Soraya had contained the explosion within the boardroom, the shockwaves were immediate. Malric, his face a mask of rage, was met at the curb not by his driver, but by a process server. He was handed a thick envelope containing a temporary restraining order, barring him from all Aurasphere properties and the initial divorce filings. Soraya had been methodical. She had decapitated his professional and personal life in a single surgical strike. His assets were frozen. The corporate cards were cancelled, the accounts linked to Petrova Global strategies locked down. Malric, a man who had never considered the price of anything, was suddenly locked out of his own immense fortune. He was a king in exile. Katerina Petrova's downfall was equally swift. She was fired via a sterile email from HR for gross misconduct. Her corporate pass was deactivated, and when she tried to call Malric, the number was already disconnected. She had been an expendable pawn. An eviction notice was taped to the door of the Soho condo, a stark reminder that her dreams of a shared empire had been built on a foundation of corporate fraud. The news of Malric's sudden resignation for personal reasons hit the financial wires by noon, causing a controlled dip in Aurasphere's stock. The official press release announcing Soraya Thorne as interim CEO stressed continuity and her commitment to the founding principles of the Thorne family legacy. The markets, calmed by statements of support from Evelyn Reed and Alistair Finch, were wary, but did not panic. The ship was taking on water, but Soraya was already at the helm. Her first act as CEO was to convene Aurasphere's senior executives. In the now liberated boardroom, she offered them something they hadn't had in years: respect. Malric Thorne was the face of this company, but you were its heart and its brain, she told them, her tone direct and sincere. As of today, this is a collaborative leadership. My job is not to micromanage you. My job is to clear away the rot and empower you to do what you do best. She announced a full independent audit, promising transparency and a commitment to restoring integrity. The executives, long accustomed to Malric's volatile ego, felt a palpable sense of relief. It was a new era. The home front was a different kind of battlefield. The penthouse, once a symbol of success, now felt like a cold museum of a dead marriage. She found her children waiting, the silence thick with questions. Leo, 17, and his father's son, was furious. "Dad called me," he said, his voice accusatory. "He said you stole his company. Is it true?" Before Soraya could answer, Chloe, 15, and quietly perceptive, interjected. "Dad hasn't been home for dinner in months, Leo. He's been working late, constantly. He's a CEO. He's busy, Leo shot back. Soraya sat down, weary from the day's battles. She had to make them understand. What I did, she said, her voice firm, was not to hurt your father. It was to protect this family and the company that is your legacy. Your father was making choices that were putting everything at risk. He broke important rules, and a leader must be held accountable, no matter who they are. Leo, unable to reconcile his image of a powerful father with this story of failure, stormed off to his room. Chloe, however, moved closer and took her mother's hand. It was a small gesture, an anchor of support in a turbulent sea. The battle for her son's understanding would be long, but for now, she had her daughter. Days turned into weeks, and Soraya worked relentlessly. She was the first in the office and the last to leave, poring over reports and meeting with department heads. The audit she initiated uncovered that Malric had been far more reckless than she'd known, using the company as his personal piggy bank in dozens of ways. Slowly, she won the respect of her new colleagues. She wasn't the charismatic visionary Malric had been, but she was the steady, ethical leader the company desperately needed. The stock stabilized, then began to climb. She impressed the leadership at LVMH with her candid updates on the audit, leaving the door to their partnership slightly ajar. Malric, meanwhile, was spiraling. Cut off from his money and power, he hired a bulldog of a divorce lawyer preparing for a scorched earth fight. He tried to rally support, painting Soraya as a power-hungry shrew. But the doors of his former allies were closed. He had been a man defined by his power, and without it, he was a ghost. About a month after the coup, Soraya was working late in her new office. The panoramic view of the city no longer felt like a monument to one man's ego, but a station of immense responsibility. Her phone rang, an unsaved number. She answered. "You think you've won, don't you?" Malric's voice was raw with bitterness. "It was never about winning, Malric," she said tiredly. "You took everything from me," he seethed. "My company, my money, my son. You gave it away, Malric. You gave it all away the moment you decided the rules didn't apply to you," she replied, her voice steady. "The company is stable. The children are safe. That's all that matters." There was a pause, then a low, chilling laugh. "This isn't over, Soraya. You may be sitting in my chair, but you will never be safe there. I built that kingdom. I can still burn it to the ground. You watch your back." He hung up. Soraya stood in the silent office, the city lights twinkling below. The threat did not frighten her. It clarified things. She had done what was necessary, excising a cancer from her company and her life. But Malric was right. This was not the end. It was merely the end of the beginning. She had won the battle for Aurasphere, but an exiled king stripped of everything is the most dangerous man of all. The war for her future was far from over. So the king was dethroned, and the underestimated queen took her seat at the head of the table. Soraya Thorne's story is a masterclass in quiet strength and strategic revenge. But as Malric's final chilling threat proves, a victory is rarely the end of the story. Can Soraya transform from a crisis manager into a true visionary leader? And what desperate, destructive moves will a man with nothing left to lose make to reclaim his lost kingdom? The battle for the boardroom is over, but the war for the Thorne legacy has just begun. They say every marriage holds secrets, but Lillian Westfield never imagined hers would nearly destroy her, especially while carrying her first child. Married to billionaire investor Christian Westfield, she believed her love story resembled a fairy tale: lavish galas, private jets, a mansion overlooking Central Park. But beneath the glittering surface brewed a betrayal so brazen it arrived with a financial invoice. The audacity. It wasn't from her husband. A mysterious woman sent Lillian a bill for services provided itemized with shocking demands. Stunned and pregnant, Lillian refused to be a victim. Instead, she crafted divorce terms so powerful they rocked New York's elite to its core. Lillian Westfield first met Christian Westfield at an auction for the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The year was 2015. The moment she spotted his dark, tailored suit and confident stride, she felt a jolt, a mixture of caution and attraction. She had grown up hearing about powerful men from her father, a former advisor at Goldman Sachs, who used to remind her that wealth can be as ruthless as it is glamorous. Yet Christian's charm disarmed her. He didn't just seem wealthy. He seemed genuinely passionate about the arts, about philanthropy, about living a life of meaning. At first glance, their life together looked plucked from a storybook. They traveled to Europe every summer, explored hidden architectural gems, and built a philanthropic foundation aimed at supporting children's education in underdeveloped regions. Lillian, an accomplished interior designer, had her own thriving business, establishing herself as the go-to decorator for boutique hotels in Manhattan. As a power couple, they often shared front-page features in lifestyle magazines. Their townhouse near Central Park boasted a marble foyer, stained glass skylight, and an elevator that glided through 5 floors of meticulously designed spaces. They hosted charity balls complete with celebrity guest lists that included people like philanthropist Bill Gates and actress Emma Watson, raising millions for causes dear to them. The public saw them as unstoppable, the epitome of a modern altruistic duo, beautiful, brilliant, and generous. Behind the scenes, though, it wasn't all gleam. The seeds of resentment had begun to sprout the moment Christian's hedge fund soared to new heights. As his business empire expanded, so did his ego. Meetings late into the night, lavish parties with potential investors, and whispered phone calls started to erode the closeness they once cherished. Lillian sensed shifts in Christian's behavior, unexplained getaways, dinner cancellations, fleeting messages on his phone that he'd quickly hide. But Lillian believed in second chances in conversation over confrontation. She also believed that life was cyclical. Times of closeness and distance came in waves. Unaware that a storm of betrayal was brewing just beyond her horizon, Lillian tried to keep her trust intact, focusing on her interior design projects and the exciting news that she was finally pregnant. Lillian grew up in a suburban New Jersey neighborhood, her father Richard O'Donnell serving as a financial consultant for Morgan Stanley. From an early age, she absorbed the language of high finance. Her father would bring home annual reports from clients like Warren Buffett and talk about the power of compound interest. It was also at the dinner table where she first learned about the pitfalls of greed and the price one pays when ambition becomes obsession. By the time she met Christian Westfield at that Met Gala auction, Lillian was already a well-regarded interior designer. She had turned a modest inheritance from her grandmother into a small fortune by flipping undervalued apartments in emerging neighborhoods. Her well-earned confidence and thorough financial knowledge ensured she was never overshadowed by wealthy suitors. Christian's background, meanwhile, was more silver-spooned. Born into old money aristocracy in Boston, he attended the most prestigious prep schools before heading to Harvard. Yet what set him apart, at least in the beginning, was his ability to empathize. He did not fit the cliché of a spoiled trust fund brat. As Lillian got to know Christian, she found a man who spoke passionately about social responsibility and climate change. He created a hedge fund that, according to him, prioritized ethical investments in renewable energy and technology aimed at improving society. The early days of their courtship were magical. They explored the Met Museum hand in hand, discussing art from the Impressionist era, then grabbed late-night pizza in Queens to keep it real, as Christian liked to say. Sundays were reserved for volunteer work at a soup kitchen, an activity Christian insisted they do to stay connected to the community. When Christian proposed a year later, it was on the steps of the Lincoln Center, following a performance of Swan Lake. The ring was a vintage emerald-cut diamond, a family heirloom passed down from his grandmother. Lillian felt overwhelmed by love and the sense of destiny. "We'll do incredible things together," Christian whispered into her ear. She believed him wholeheartedly. During these early years, Lillian never doubted his sincerity. If Christian needed more hours at the office, she assumed it was for the hedge fund's philanthropic goals. If he was secretive at times, she chalked it up to the demands of client confidentiality. How could she have known that beneath the facade of social consciousness and genuine heart, the seeds of infidelity would eventually take root? Running her own interior design firm had not been easy. Lillian's first big break came when she was approached to redesign the interior of a boutique hotel in Soho. She spent months curating artisanal light fixtures, sourcing reclaimed wood for accent walls, and designing custom furniture that seamlessly blended comfort with minimalist aesthetics. The project earned her a feature in Architectural Digest, catapulting her into Manhattan's elite design circle. Lillian soon expanded her portfolio, taking on high-profile clients. She balanced artistic vision with commercial viability, her skill lying in the ability to interpret her clients' personalities into living spaces. Rich colors and subtle textures became her signature. She believed that a home should tell a story about the people who lived there, one of warmth, openness, and the life experiences they cherished. This philosophy extended into her personal life. Lillian was a giver, always placing others first. She volunteered at local shelters, helped new designers find footing in a competitive industry, and offered internships to promising students from underprivileged backgrounds. She possessed a quiet resilience, never one to broadcast her struggles or triumphs. Instead, she let the results speak for themselves. When she discovered she was pregnant, Lillian's heart brimmed with joy. She envisioned a child who would inherit both her creativity and Christian's passion for social good. She began planning a nursery in soft grays and buttery yellows, set to be the coziest space in their enormous townhouse. But amid her excitement, she noticed the first ripples of tension with Christian. He seemed distracted, his phone always buzzing with calls from work. Occasionally, she would overhear bits of hushed conversations that ended abruptly once she entered the room. Still, she clung to hope. Love, after all, had guided them this far, and she believed people could weather storms if they communicated openly. Little did she know, she was about to receive a wake-up call, a private invoice in the mail, a brazen challenge to her place in Christian's life, and a demand that would shatter her illusions of security. The Westfield Fund. Christian's brainchild was initially small. He invested mostly in tech startups that promised environmental solutions, solar energy wind turbines, and eco-friendly manufacturing. His success stories included early investments in Tesla and Beyond Meat, which propelled the fund into the spotlight as an example of how ethical investments could also be lucrative. As the fund grew, Christian found himself rubbing shoulders with New York's most prominent financiers. He attended exclusive gatherings at the St. Regis Hotel and private dinners in penthouse suites overlooking the Hudson River. Clients flocked to him, eager to be associated with a fund that claimed to do good for the planet while multiplying returns. Those who studied Christian's ascent closely noticed how everything seemed to accelerate after a lavish weekend in the Hamptons, hosted by none other than Robert Crown, the reclusive oil magnate turned philanthropist. Rumors circulated about who Christian rubbed elbows with that weekend, executives from Morgan Stanley, a few tech geniuses, and some foreign dignitaries known to hold massive generational wealth. Some friends teased Christian that he was transforming from a philanthropic dreamer into a cutthroat tycoon. He laughed it off, but something undeniably shifted in him. He started wearing bespoke suits from Savile Row, arrived at charity galas in a chauffeur-driven Bentley, and increasingly prized the image of success. It was as though he believed the appearance of virtue was as important, if not more so, than actual virtue. Lillian noticed these changes. In the past, Christian had spoken passionately about supporting impoverished villages in Africa. Now he was too busy managing new deals to attend the foundation meetings. He insisted that a thriving hedge fund would allow them to give more. "We're playing the long game," he'd say, with a charming smile. But after each new infusion of capital, Christian seemed more restless. Phone calls lingered late into the night, often behind closed doors. Lillian could sense an invisible wall erecting between them. When she tried to get his attention mentioning new designs, philanthropic initiatives, even her doctor's appointments, his replies were absent-minded and perfunctory. Despite her growing concerns, she hoped it was a phase. Many men, she reasoned, became workaholics to secure a future for their families. And with her pregnancy, perhaps Christian felt added pressure to expand their wealth. But those suspicions about him, having secrets, whatever they were, gnawed at her, a persistent whisper in the back of her mind that refused to be silenced. A few months into her pregnancy, Lillian started noticing anomalies that went beyond mere busyness. On Christian's nights out, supposedly spent with venture capitalists, he would come home with a faint trace of perfume floral notes she had never owned. When Lillian asked about it, he laughed it off. "You know how parties are," he said. "People hug your suit, picks up 1,000 cents. Lillian tried to brush it aside, but more clues surfaced: phone calls at odd hours that Christian would abruptly dismiss as wrong numbers. Suspicious credit card charges at a spa in Midtown on nights he claimed to be at the office, plus the occasional text message from unfamiliar names, women she had never heard of. Christian's excuses stacked up. The tension seeped into every corner of their relationship. Their once lively breakfast chats turned into stiff, polite conversations about schedules and surface matters. No deeper connection, no spontaneous laughter. At times, Christian looked at her belly as though it was both a blessing and a burden. One evening, as Lillian worked late on a new design proposal, she discovered Christian had left his iPad open on the kitchen counter. A message appeared, the preview reading, "Miss me already?" She felt a surge of panic. Before she could unlock the device, Christian swooped in, snatched it, and wore a guarded expression. "Work stuff," he muttered. Lillian's chest tightened. She felt her baby kick as if sensing her anxiety. That same night, she confronted Christian calmly. "If there's something you need to tell me, let's talk. We have a child on the way. We owe it to each other, to be honest," he responded with a dismissive wave. "I'm just stressed, Lillian. Could we not create more drama?" So she stepped back. For the moment, she chose to place her faith in her husband, her unborn child, and the memories of better times. She had no idea her entire world would soon come crashing down, delivered in the form of an elegant envelope addressed to her personally with a price tag attached that would make her blood boil. It happened on a Friday morning. Lillian was in the foyer reviewing design samples when the doorbell rang. Expecting a delivery of custom fabrics, she opened the door to see a courier holding a small stack of envelopes. Among them was a sleek black envelope sealed with a wax stamp, no return address. Something about it radiated importance and mystery. Lillian set the other mail aside and carefully opened the black envelope. Inside was a crisp piece of stationery that read, "Invoice to Mrs. Lillian Westfield. 4 evenings at the Eclipse Spa. 4,500. Shopping spree at Bergdorf. Goodman personal items. $12,000. Fine dining at Le Poème private booth. Chef's tasting. 2,500. Emotional labor and time. As discussed, $50,000. Total $69,000. At the bottom, scrawled in a careful looping handwriting, was a brief note. Please settle this bill promptly. These luxuries were enjoyed at your husband's request. Tiffany Monroe. For a moment, Lillian stood frozen, unable to comprehend the audacity. A mistress, a woman openly acknowledging her affair with Christian, was invoicing her rage, humiliation, and heartbreak collided in a single, dizzying wave. She dropped the envelope, sank into a chair, and tried to steady her breathing. Her baby fluttered within her, an unsettling reminder of the stakes. Tiffany Monroe. The name was unfamiliar, but Lillian suspected it was the same person behind those suspicious messages on Christian's iPad. How had things escalated to a point where the woman felt confident enough to demand money directly from the wife Lillian spent the afternoon in a spiral of disbelief and despair? She pressed the invoice against the kitchen table, half tempted to rip it to shreds. Instead, she tried calling Christian. Straight to voicemail. She texted him, short and direct. "We need to talk ASAP." Hours passed without a response. By sundown, humiliation gave way to fury. How dare Tiffany treat her like a business partner who simply owed her a cut of Christian's extravagances? How dare Christian remain silent? Lillian began drafting a plan in her head, one that would safeguard her unborn child and ensure that she would never again be at the mercy of anyone's betrayal. The mistress wanted a bill settled. Lillian would respond with something far more drastic: divorce terms that no one in their right mind would dare dismiss. Christian finally walked through the door at around 10 that night, reeking of cologne and exhaustion. Lillian waited in the living room, the black envelope perched ominously on the coffee table. The moment he saw it, his face paled. He tried to mask his panic behind a forced smile, but Lillian's glare told him that no charade would work this time. She held up the invoice. "Want to explain this?" Her voice was low, almost calm, which unnerved Christian more than any outburst would. He stammered, "It's not what you think." But the words rang hollow in the silent room. Christian Lillian said, her voice quivering just enough to betray the emotional storm within. "I've tolerated late nights, suspicious phone calls, and secrets, but now this woman Tiffany Monroe has crossed a line. She sent me a bill for being your mistress. That's beyond humiliation. That's cruelty." Christian sank into an armchair. For a moment, he covered his face with his hands. When he finally looked up, Lillian saw a glimpse of guilt, overshadowed by desperation. Tiffany. She was an investor contact. One thing led to another. It was a mistake. Lillian held up a hand. "Stop. I don't need every sordid detail." She took a trembling breath. "What I need is respect, honesty, and space to think." He tried to move closer to take her hand, but she pulled away. "Lillian, I love you. I just don't," she said sharply. No more empty words. She pressed a protective hand against her belly. "I have a child to consider, a future that cannot be tied to your lies and your wandering impulses." Christian tried to protest, but Lillian's steely resolve shone in her eyes. She told him she would be meeting with her attorney and that she expected his cooperation in a formal separation, if not a complete divorce. He pleaded, offered to see a marriage counselor, anything to keep this from exploding into public scandal. But Lillian's mind was already made up. She was no longer the naive, hopeful wife who believed everything could be mended with forgiveness. This betrayal, complete with a humiliating invoice, was a line in the sand, and she intended to make Christian and his mistress regret every cent of that $69,000. As dawn broke, Lillian found herself in a dilemma. She didn't want to face this alone, yet she hated the idea of revealing Christian's betrayal to friends or family. It felt too raw, too shameful. But she needed guidance, and so with a heavy heart, she called the one person who would stand by her unconditionally, her old college friend, Rebecca "Becky" Sandoval. Becky was a lawyer specializing in family law, with a stint at the prestigious firm Morgan & Ledbetter. They had remained close since dorm life at Parsons School of Design, bonding over late-night pizza and endless chatter about personal dreams. Becky had always admired Lillian's warmth and creativity, just as Lillian admired Becky's fierce intellect and unwavering loyalty. When Lillian arrived at Becky's Upper West Side apartment, she clutched the incriminating invoice like a damning piece of evidence. Becky's eyes widened as she read the details, her face flushing with indignation. What kind of sociopath demands money from a pregnant wife for entertaining her husband? Becky asked, outraged. Lillian sighed, tears brimming. "This is what my life has become. I feel humiliated and lost. I don't want to remain married to him if this is how he treats me. But I also need to protect myself and especially the baby." Becky set aside her coffee mug. "I'll help you navigate this. We'll make sure you get what you deserve. Christian is wealthy, and you've invested years of emotional labor and your own funds into this marriage. You should be compensated, especially with a child on the way." Relief flooded Lillian. "I've been so afraid. Christian's influence is enormous. The press loves him. I don't want to be seen as some gold digger or a scorned woman looking for revenge." Becky's gaze hardened. "Don't you dare blame yourself. If he wants to flaunt his mistress's bills, we'll see how he handles real legal action. Let's prepare for the worst. It might get ugly, but you won't face it alone." With that conversation, Lillian felt a spark of hope. She had an ally, someone who believed in her worth and had the legal chops to fight for it. The next move was to draft a set of divorce terms, so formidable that Tiffany's petty invoice would look like spare change in comparison. Days passed as Becky and Lillian meticulously prepared the divorce papers. They combed through Christian's assets, from his shares in ecotech companies to real estate holdings in Manhattan, London, and even a small vineyard in Napa Valley. It was a painstaking process, but each detail added another brick to Lillian's protective wall. During this time, Christian vacillated between begging forgiveness and lashing out. He bombarded Lillian with frantic calls, alternately promising to end things with Tiffany and accusing Lillian of overreacting. Her silence only fueled his desperation. But the mistress, Tiffany Monroe, had other plans. She was about to make her move, determined to ensure she wasn't dismissed as a fling. One morning, Lillian awoke to a flurry of missed calls from unknown numbers. Confused, she checked her voicemail. "Mrs. Westfield, We're reporters from the Daily Chronicle. We'd love a comment on the rumor that your husband might be separating from you for Ms. Munro." Her heart raced as she realized Tiffany had leaked the affair to the press. Within hours, paparazzi swarmed her townhouse, snapping photos of Lillian with her baby bump, shouting questions about the woman who sent you a bill. Panicked Lillian called Becky, who advised her to stay indoors and not respond publicly. "Any statement now could be twisted," Becky cautioned. "Let's finalize the divorce terms first." But Tiffany wasn't done. She posted cryptic photos on social media, hinting at a luxurious lifestyle spa visits, helicopter rides, lavish dinners. In one particularly brazen post, she wore a diamond necklace that Lillian recognized as Christian's gift during their first anniversary trip to Paris. The caption read, "When he knows how to keep a woman happy." Lillian's fury threatened to consume her. This woman's audacity was unrelenting. She was not simply content with an affair. She craved publicity, as though flaunting her conquest of a billionaire husband was a twisted badge of honor. While Christian tried to contain the media fallout, Lillian focused on her unborn child. She felt the baby's kicks more frequently. Now a constant reminder that she wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for a secure future for her little one, free from the toxic betrayal that had marred the family's foundations. The tension surged to a boiling point. If Tiffany thought she could manipulate the narrative and paint Lillian as a hapless victim, she had underestimated the strength and cunning of the woman she had so brazenly provoked. The phone refused to stop ringing. Journalists, bloggers, even former acquaintances looking for gossip. Everyone seemed ravenous for a scoop. Lillian leaned against her kitchen counter, trying to steady her breath. Christian had left frantic messages. "Don't do this, Lillian. We can weather the storm. I'll cut Tiffany out of my life." But a single glance at the black envelope pinned to her fridge reminded her why she couldn't stay silent any longer. She grabbed her keys and left the townhouse escorted by a private security guard Becky had arranged to keep paparazzi at bay. Her destination was the Morgan & Ledbetter law firm, Becky's office, where she would finalize her decision to file for divorce. Once inside Becky's glass-walled conference room, she was greeted by towering stacks of documents. Lillian's chest tightened at the sight. "This is it, then, the official separation," she said. Softly, Becky placed a reassuring hand on Lillian's shoulder. "I know it's overwhelming, but we've made sure every detail is covered: spousal support, child support, property division, you name it." Lillian nodded, flipping through the pages. Her eyes landed on the settlement figure, an amount so staggering it seemed surreal. But as Becky reminded her, Christian's personal fortune had soared into the billions. The sum was only a fraction of his empire, yet more than enough to ensure a comfortable life for Lillian and the baby. "Are you sure you're ready for the media circus this might spark?" Becky asked, her voice gentle. Divorce with these stakes is bound to attract even more attention. Lillian inhaled deeply, recalling the humiliating bill Tiffany had sent. She imagined the quiet life she wanted for her child, free from secrets and humiliations. "I'm ready," she said, signing the necessary forms. With that pen stroke, she severed the bonds that had once been the cornerstone of her love story. No matter the chaos to come, she resolved that her child would never look at her with the sorrow of a mother too fearful to stand up for herself. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the moment she walked out of that office, she would be Lillian Westfield, soon to be ex-wife of a billionaire and a woman determined to forge a new beginning. The documents lay neatly stacked on Becky's conference room table, a quiet storm bound in crisp legal formatting. Lillian stared at the title page. Draft Westfield versus Westfield Dissolution of Marriage Agreement, and felt her chest tighten with a rush of conflicting emotions. This was no longer about heartbreak. This was about reclaiming her power, securing her child's future, and sending a message to a man who had treated her love as expendable. Becky slid the top page toward her. It's all here. Everything we discussed. I've made sure no one can accuse you of being vindictive. This is clean, comprehensive, and bulletproof. Together they reviewed the details one more time. The settlement began with the foundation generous spousal maintenance tied to a fixed percentage of Christian's annual earnings, calculated to grow proportionally with the success of the Westfield Fund. Given his billions in holdings and assets, it would ensure Lillian lived not just comfortably, but independently. Child support came next. A secure figure that would be reviewed annually, with adjustments for inflation healthcare costs and private education from kindergarten to Ivy League. Becky had even included contingencies, full coverage for a nanny, prenatal and postnatal care, and a clause that Christian would be legally responsible for any emergency medical expenses for both mother and child, no matter the cost. Then came the trust fund. Your child, Becky said softly, will have full access to a multi-million-dollar trust by age 25. You'll manage it as guardian until then. No interference. Lillian nodded, feeling the protective mother in her rising. He won't grow up wondering if he's worthy. Real estate was next. Lillian would retain full ownership of the Boston estate, historic, sprawling and quietly luxurious. It wasn't just property. It was legacy, and she would make sure it became a haven of stability for her child. The Central Park townhouse, their former marital home, would be liquidated. The proceeds would be split, but only after Lillian received a payout for the renovations and interior design work she had done herself. Her own touch, her artistry finally acknowledged as valuable. But perhaps the most telling section of the settlement came in the form of two unusual clauses. The first, profit sharing in the Westfield Fund. Though Christian had always been its public face, Lillian had helped shape its philanthropic identity. Her introductions, her public speaking, her networking in philanthropic circles had brought in over a dozen major investors. Becky argued and documented those contributions in detail. Every man builds his empire on the back of someone, Becky said. And you were the one holding him up. Now the world will know it. The second clause was symbolic and cathartic. It was labeled compensatory damages for emotional distress and public humiliation. A direct response to the infamous mistress invoice Tiffany had so boldly sent. Becky tapped the section. $500,000. It won't undo what she did. But it's a message? Lillian didn't smile, but her eyes hardened with clarity. She sent me a bill, she murmured. So I'm sending her the invoice she wasn't expecting. At the end of the document, a confidentiality agreement sealed the terms. If Christian or Tiffany leaked any personal details or attempted to slander Lillian's name in the press, the financial penalties would be swift and severe. It was, as Becky put it, the legal equivalent of a velvet hammer. Lillian set down the pen and looked at Becky. Do you think he'll sign? Becky leaned back. He'll fume. He'll curse. But he'll sign. If he doesn't, we take it to court, and Tiffany's antics become courtroom evidence. Christian knows exactly how much he stands to lose. Lillian breathed deeply, her hand resting on her belly. This isn't about revenge. It's about respect. For myself, For my child. Becky nodded. Exactly. Without another word, Lillian picked up the pen and signed her name. It was elegant, it was final, and it was worth every dollar. She had entered the fight with her dignity in tatters. Now she was walking out with her name, her future, and $1 million reminder that some women don't break. They build. Christian Westfield stared at the divorce settlement as if it were written in fire. Every clause, every figure, every line item was a monument to the reality he had so carefully tried to avoid. Lillian wasn't bluffing. She wasn't broken. She had turned every ounce of betrayal into strategy, and he was holding the evidence of it in his trembling hands. His office at the Westfield Fund, once a sanctuary of ego and ambition, now felt like a gilded cage. The sunlight filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows offered no comfort. The city below, which once bowed to his every whim, now looked indifferent. He grabbed his phone and dialed. Lillian answered on the third ring. Her voice was cool, steady. "You've seen the papers, I assume." "You're out of your mind," Christian snapped. "These demands are insane. Half the Boston estate, a profit share in my hedge fund. You didn't build any of that." "I built your brand," Lillian replied calmly. "I gave speeches, hosted events, introduced you to investors who believed in our shared vision. And I carried your child while your mistress was out shopping with your black card." Christian fell silent. She continued, voice low but firm. "I'm done arguing. This is about what I'm owed. What our child is owed." He tried to pivot. "I never meant for it to go this far. Tiffany was a mistake. I'll make it right. I'll end it." "You ended it the moment you let her send me a bill," she said. "Now I'm just collecting what's due." He clenched his jaw. "If this goes public, it'll destroy me." "Then sign quietly," she answered. "Or drag it out and let the world watch." The call ended. Christian hurled the phone across the room. It hit the glass wall with a sharp crack, but didn't shatter just like Lillian. She didn't break. She simply became sharper. He sat back down and ran a hand through his hair. In his mind, she had always been the quiet one. The soft-spoken designer who stood by his side smiled for the cameras and forgave easily. He never expected her to outmaneuver him. He never imagined she would be the one to bring him to his knees. But now, for the first time in his life, Christian Westfield had lost. Not in business, not on paper, but where it mattered most. And Lillian. She had just begun to win. The headlines didn't slow down. If anything, Tiffany Monroe's outrageous behavior at the law firm had poured gasoline on an already raging fire. The press had a field day. Rumors swirled across Manhattan's elite social circuits, mixing fact and fabrication into a sensational cocktail of betrayal scandal and high society drama. Westfield showdown, mistress crashes negotiations. The $69,000 invoice that triggered $1 million divorce. Pregnant wife shuts down. Mistress mid-tantrum. Bravo. Lillian didn't bother reading most of it. She stayed focused. The settlement was still pending, and Christian's legal team, led by the notoriously aggressive Henry Steinberg, had not backed down. If anything, they were doubling down, working to undermine her role in Christian's empire, attacking her emotional distress claims, and trying to portray her as a woman using pregnancy to secure wealth. It was a ruthless strategy. But Becky had anticipated every move. While Steinberg launched his offensive, Becky went on the defensive, and then the offensive of her own. Through a calculated anonymous leak to a reputable gossip columnist, a key piece of the narrative hit the media like lightning, the original invoice Tiffany had sent to Lillian. Public opinion, which had been somewhat divided, swung sharply in Lillian's favor. The image of a pregnant woman receiving a demand for spa bills and emotional labor from her husband's mistress sent shockwaves through society. Tiffany Monroe quickly became a cautionary tale, lampooned online, mocked on talk shows, and widely seen as a greedy opportunist who had overplayed her hand. She actually sent a bill, one late-night host joked. Was there a line item for betrayal with interest? The media, once circling Lillian like vultures, now began referring to her with a new moniker, the Graceful Storm. But it wasn't just a PR win. Behind the scenes, the damage to Christian's carefully curated public image was substantial. The Westfield Fund, which prided itself on socially responsible investing, was suddenly the subject of investor scrutiny. Several high-profile clients privately reached out to Christian's partners with concerns. Rumors began to surface that certain board members were considering asking him to step down as CEO temporarily, if not permanently. And Christian felt it. For the first time in his professional life, he wasn't in control. In private emails and messages, he vacillated between fury and panic. He texted Lillian several times a day, attempting to spin everything. "Let's talk. I didn't expect her to do this. I never meant for you to get dragged into this. I still love you." Lillian never replied. The silence was strategic and empowering. Instead, she met with Becky daily to refine the settlement, adjusting child support to scale with inflation, inserting clauses that would secure access to trust funds for the child, and demanding formal recognition of her contributions to the fund's public image. Every speech you gave Becky reminded her, every gala you hosted, every introduction you made that has value. Don't let them erase that. Christian's team countered. They attempted to settle under the table, offering a smaller figure in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement. They framed it as a dignified solution. Lillian saw it for what it was, a final attempt to hush the truth. Her answer was firm. No deal without justice. While her name was being tossed around dinner parties and editorial columns, Lillian stayed grounded. She focused on her health, her baby's well-being, and her own mental clarity. Prenatal yoga calls with her mother and long walks in Riverside Park became her sacred rituals. She journaled often, not about pain, but about resilience. And when news broke that Tiffany Monroe had fled the city, her social media gone dark, her brand in tatters, Lillian didn't celebrate. She simply felt done. Christian's world was imploding. His empire strained under public pressure. His charm, once his strongest weapon, had lost its power. And now, cornered on all sides, he agreed to a final meeting. The room was the same one where Tiffany had once thrown a tantrum. But this time, Lillian was calm, commanding, and utterly unmoved. On one side, Christian and his legal team, their expressions guarded. On the other, Lillian, Becky, and the full weight of truth on their side. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about legacy. And Lillian had no intention of walking away with anything less than everything she and her child deserved. Lillian had expected the legal negotiations to be tense. She had not expected Tiffany Monroe to storm through the doors of the law firm in 5-inch stilettos, a designer handbag clutched in one manicured hand and a folded legal document in the other, like it was a weapon. It was midday, and the conference room was quiet. On one side sat Lillian Becky and a composed junior associate. On the other, Christian and his lawyer, Henry Steinberg, who had been carefully reviewing the final draft of the divorce settlement. That delicate calm shattered when the door burst open. "You think you can just erase me?" Tiffany's voice sliced through the air, shrill and furious. Everyone turned. "Tiffany, this is a private." Steinberg began rising from his seat. She ignored him and marched straight to Lillian, her heels clicking with sharp finality. "Mrs. Westfield?" She sneered. "You have no idea what's coming. Christian made promises. I was there for him when he needed someone. I deserve to be compensated." Lillian didn't flinch. She sat tall, her baby bump visible beneath her cream-knit dress, her face an unreadable mask of calm. "Compensated?" Lillian asked softly, as though tasting the word. "Yes," Tiffany snapped, waving the letter in her hand. "I have a statement from my lawyer. I've been threatened, silenced, and now you want to walk away with everything? Like I was never part of it." Christian rose, then his expression a mix of panic and disbelief. "Tiffany, stop. We've already talked about this." "You weren't supposed to—" "Oh, I'm done waiting," she snapped at him, turning back to Lillian. "I won't be erased. I was with him for months. While you were playing perfect wife, I was the one keeping him sane. You think you're the victim? Please. This world doesn't reward women who play it safe. It rewards women who fight." Becky stood now, placing herself subtly between Lillian and the raging woman. "You're trespassing Ms. Monroe. And from what I can tell, you've just attempted to issue a demand under threat on record." Tiffany rolled her eyes. "Oh, spare me the lawyer routine. You're just mad I spoke first." Lillian slowly stood. Her calm was unnerving. She walked past Becky, past Christian, until she stood directly in front of Tiffany, close enough to see the sweat beading beneath the woman's flawless foundation. "You sent me a bill," Lillian said, voice steady. "For massages, for dinners, for time. You dared to put a price on betrayal and deliver it to the woman carrying his child." Tiffany's lips parted, but no words came. Lillian took a small breath. "Let me make something very clear. You are not owed a cent. You were a willing participant in someone else's marriage. And if Christian promised you something, take it up with him. But you will never again speak to me. Never send me anything. Never show up in my space." Becky chimed in. "If you do, Ms. Monroe will file for harassment and a restraining order." Christian looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. "Tiffany, leave." Tiffany glared at him. "You're a coward." He didn't argue. Lillian continued, her voice now cool and clear. "You came here today to prove something. But all you did was confirm what I already knew. You're not a threat. You're noise. And I no longer listen to noise." Tiffany's confidence cracked. She turned to Christian one last time. "Don't think this is over." Then she stormed out, the echo of her heels fading down the hallway. For a long moment, the room was still. Then Becky let out a slow exhale. "Well, that saves us a subpoena." Lillian sat back down and glanced at Christian. He couldn't meet her eyes. The mistress had shown her cards and folded. Lillian, meanwhile, had just proven to everyone in that room that there was only one woman worthy of the Westfield name, and she had no intention of giving it up quietly. The hospital room was unnervingly quiet. Machines beeped, steadily monitoring Lillian and the baby as nurses came and went in soft-soled shoes. Christian sat in the corner watching her sleep. He looked smaller now, his usual commanding presence wilted under guilt and exhaustion. The bags under his eyes weren't from stress alone, they were from shame. Earlier that morning, a new test had revealed complications with Lillian's pregnancy. Though the baby's vitals were stable, doctors warned of heightened risk. Bed rest is crucial, the specialist had said firmly, and minimal emotional stress. You're both strong, but your body needs protection now more than ever. Lillian had nodded, her lips pressed tightly together. She wasn't scared of pain. She had lived with worse. But the possibility of losing her child because of Christian's betrayal, that thought was unbearable. Christian had lingered at her bedside all day, offering water-fluffing pillows, whispering apologies. Lillian didn't trust any of it. Still, she allowed him to stay, not out of forgiveness, but because she wanted answers. As dusk fell and the baby's heartbeat echoed gently in the background, she finally asked why her. Christian hesitated. She turned her head slowly to face him. No more deflections. No more PR statements. I deserve to know. He looked away for a long moment, then took a slow breath. It wasn't love, he began. Voice brittle. It wasn't even lust at first. It was leverage. Lillian's brow furrowed. Christian swallowed hard. Tiffany. She was connected to a group of potential investors. Old money, European banking families. One of them wanted favors, introductions, visibility. Tiffany offered access. She played her role, I played mine. You used her. To close deals? Lillian asked, horrified. He nodded miserably. At first, yes. Then she got comfortable. She wanted more. I didn't stop it. I thought I could control it, contain it. Lillian's hand trembled slightly as she touched her belly. And me. What was I? A prop for your public image? No, he said quickly, standing. Never. You were the only real thing in my life. I know that now. But you didn't know it then, she replied flatly. Not when you let your mistress invoice me. Not when you lied. Not when you put our child at risk. He couldn't meet her eyes. I thought I married a man with vision, she said, softly, tears welling but not falling. Instead, I married someone who sold his soul for quarterly gains. Christian moved closer. Lillian, I'm so sorry. I'll spend the rest of my life making this right. She looked at him, weary but unwavering. You can't undo this, but you can stay out of my way while I protect what you nearly destroyed. That night, as Christian left the room, shoulders slumped under the weight of his own undoing, Lillian reached for the small ultrasound photo taped beside her bed. She ran her fingers over the black and white blur of her baby's tiny face. I'll do better, she whispered to her unborn child. For both of us. The betrayal was complete, but so was her resolve. The week Lillian spent in the hospital passed in a haze of fluorescent lights, whispered check-ins, and quiet determination. Her condition had stabilized, the baby was strong, and doctors were optimistic. But emotionally, Lillian was still reeling, not from fear of the future, but from finally accepting the irrevocable truth her marriage to Christian was over. Christian visited often. He brought flowers, asked about the baby, and hovered like a man trying to rewind a clock already broken. But Lillian no longer softened at his gestures. She spoke to him kindly but distantly, the tone of a woman who had drawn a line and refused to cross it again. "You made your choices," she told him during one of his visits. "Now I'm making mine." While Lillian recovered, Becky worked tirelessly behind the scenes. The updated divorce terms were not just strategic, they were airtight. Every clause protected Lillian's physical health, emotional well-being, and financial future. Any further medical care or complications from the pregnancy would be covered in full. The child support agreement wasn't just generous. It was indexed to Christian's investment growth and protected from fluctuation. A separate education fund would guarantee the child access to top institutions, no matter what scandals might affect the Westfield name in the years ahead. Christian's legal team reviewed the documents in tense silence. They knew they had no leverage left. His mistress had imploded their case with one reckless outburst. His reputation, though salvaged publicly with a carefully crafted press release, was in tatters behind closed doors. Investors were uneasy. Board members had whispered about voting him out. And Lillian, graceful as ever, had won without ever stepping into the mud. With quiet reluctance, Christian signed. No outburst, no final attempt at persuasion. Just the scratch of pen on paper, the official end of the marriage he had ruined. The following afternoon, Lillian was released from the hospital. Her steps were slow, cautious, but every movement radiated purpose. Paparazzi waited outside the private entrance. She walked past them calmly, sunglasses on a protective hand resting on her baby bump. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke louder than any headline ever could. A car arranged by Becky whisked her away, not to the townhouse she once shared with Christian, but to a sleek, sunlit condo in Tribeca one Lillian had secured under her own name. The space was modern and warm, designed by one of her former protégés and gifted to her as a gesture of solidarity. As she stepped inside, something in her exhaled. Not relief, not triumph. Freedom. There were still boxes to unpack, nursery plans to finalize, and 1,000 small tasks to prepare for motherhood. But for the first time in months, maybe even years, she felt weightless. Her name was hers again, her space, her future. In the weeks that followed, the media cycle shifted. Tiffany Monroe, once smug and calculating, faded from the spotlight. Her attempt to provoke Lillian into public humiliation had backfired spectacularly. After her tantrum at the law firm and failed attempt at extortion, no outlet wanted to hear her side. She had become a punchline, not a headline. Christian maintained a dignified silence, releasing a statement that read, "After careful reflection, Ms. Westfield and I have decided to part ways amicably. I remain committed to supporting her and our child with the utmost respect and privacy." But Lillian didn't need his words. She had everything she needed: her own business, her child, and a renewed sense of who she was. She resumed design work, slowly starting with remote consultations and vision boards. Her first client post-settlement was a new wellness retreat in upstate New York. The space, she decided, would be built on themes of renewal, balance, and quiet strength. In a way, it mirrored her own rebirth. Her friends returned, some with apologies for not seeing the cracks, sooner others simply offering support without explanation. Lillian welcomed them with open arms. She had no energy for bitterness, only forward momentum. In late spring, she stood in the condo's living room, a glass of herbal tea in hand, sunlight streaming across the hardwood floor. Her baby kicked softly beneath her dress, a small reminder of all she had fought for. She smiled not at the world, not at a camera, but at herself. She had not only survived betrayal, she had transformed it. The mistress had sent her a bill. But Lillian, she sent back divorce terms worth millions, and in the process she secured something even more valuable: peace. Lillian's journey reminds us that betrayal, no matter how deep, can be a powerful catalyst for rediscovering our own worth. She turned a humiliating demand from her husband's mistress into an opportunity to secure the future for herself and her child. In doing so, she proved that resilience and self-respect can outweigh even the grandest illusions of wealth and status.